Trish and Rob McGregor welcome you to a place where all kinds of phenomena flourish. Voices whisper ancient secrets, signs and symbols are abundant. UFOs, ETs, ghosts, and even the dead move about freely. Here we meet authors, researchers, and investigators of the mysterious, the strange, and of the inexplicable anomalies that surround us. Step out of the everyday world and take a journey into the mystical underground. Here we go. And 3, 2.
Welcome to the Mystical Underground. Thank you for joining us. This is Rob McGregor.
And Trish McGregor.
And our producer and tech magician, John Posey. You can go to the mysticalunderground.com where we make regular blog posts and where you can find out about our books. Among them are Phenomena, Harnessing Your Psychic Abilities, The Secrets of Spirit Communication, Sensing the Future, and Aliens in the Backyard. Our upcoming book is called The Shift, Reports from the Mystical Underground. Trish's new novel, White Crows, will also be coming. Oh, shit.
Rob, we are bad. Okay, scratch all this.
Let me just change that so I don't read over the. Okay, Trish's new novel, White Crows, is out. Okay, all right. Now I won't read the wrong thing again. One more time, John. Sorry.
Okay. And luckily this is going out today, so I'll know to go straight to this take. So
okay, good.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Without any notes. So all right, we'll start in 3, 2.
Welcome to the Mystical Underground. Thank you for joining us. This is Rob McGregor.
And Trish McGregor.
And our producer and tech magician, John Posey. You can go to the mysticalunderground.com where we make regular blog posts and where you can find out about our books. Among them are Phenomena, Harnessing Your Psychic Abilities, The Secrets of Spirit Communication, Sensing the Future, and Aliens in the Backyard. Our upcoming book is called The Shift, Reports from the Mystical Underground. Trish's new novel, White Crows, is out, and Rob has been slowly releasing the audio edition of Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings.
Alexa Blye is our guest today. She's a California native, a baby boomer, and a family therapist living in Southern California with her Goldendoodle Penelope. Growing up, she was influenced by the social unrest and changes of the 60s and has been a social justice advocate beginning when she was in middle school, then high school and college. Alexa went on to become a family therapist and 10 years ago began specializing in working with survivors of narcissistic families, where one member, sometimes a parent, other times a sibling, and sometimes a spouse, suffers from narcissistic behaviors. The reality bending, gaslighting, manipulations, and isolation leave family members suffering from complex post-traumatic stress, often knowing something isn't right, but they can't put their finger on just what it is. After time, some members just succumb to chronic self-doubt and must find themselves again. Though semi-retired with a private practice in Southern California, Alexis continues to commit herself to making a positive difference in people's lives. She's also the author of The Good Sister and Her Flying Monkeys, which focuses on a family that has a narcissistic person in it. Welcome, Alexa. So glad you're joining us.
Hi, Trish. Hi, Rob.
Hello.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward
Sorry,
to
this
this.
got off to a rough start here. Okay, we've got a lot of questions. All right, these days, the word gaslighting gets tossed around a lot in a lot of different situations. How would you as a counselor define it?
Well, gaslight has come into mainstream media now, so everybody's talking about it. Originally, gaslight came from a movie in 1944 about a husband who wanted to gain control of his wife's millions of dollars. So what he did was he started dimming the gas lights in their attic so that downstairs the lights would dim, and she would wonder, what's wrong here? And he'd say, what do you mean? Nothing's wrong here. And after a while, she started showing signs of anxiety and doubting herself and feeling like she was going crazy. And he would say, you know, what's wrong with you? And the idea was to commit her to an insane asylum, which if you're isolated in a gaslighting situation, especially when it's intentional like that, you can end up exhibiting all kinds of pathological behaviors that actually are natural reactions to being in that kind of crazy making environment. And gaslighting essentially nowadays is not just when it's intentional, it can be unintentional. It's when somebody rearranges reality, creates alternative facts, negates your reality. What you just heard isn't what you heard. What I just said isn't what I said. Those kinds of things. And we've seen it on the national stage, but we find it quite often in families. Some of the examples that probably haven't been referred to gaslighting but have the same impact is in a traditional alcoholic addict home where reality is denied around the alcoholic or addict's behavior, like, oh no, they weren't that drunk last night, so it's minimizing. Oh no, that didn't happen, or getting up and cleaning up the vomit before everybody gets up in the morning and pretends it didn't happen, even though people can smell it and knows it's happening. It's all denied, and that really causes people to question their reality. Another common example is when somebody's having an affair and the spouse knows something's wrong, can't put their finger on it. Whenever that's the answer is always something that's and negates their reality. Excuse me.
John, you may want to stop it. We just had a glitch here.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
now we can.
Now we can, yeah.
Can you hear it, John?
Okay. Yeah. It got out of sync for a second, but I think we're back. So
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can hear me okay now?
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask the
Okay.
next question.
Yes.
In your novel, The Good Sister, which came out several months ago, we see gaslighting in action. Tell us about that story.
Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, that story is about Elena, who is a paranoid, take no prisoner drug trafficker who turns into a FBI fugitive and marries a cop to reinvent her identity. And in that story, her reinvented identity is challenged and she finds it at risk by a brother who has Asperger's. So what she does is, and this is typical of gaslighting in our contemporary times, is she goes around to different people planting gossip about him. And she does it in two different ways. She goes around telling many people that he's a pedophile. This is inspired by a true story, by the way. And then she goes around to family members saying, you know, people are going to misinterpret his behavior around our nephew and think that he's a pedophile. So the gaslighting is going to be happening on two different dimensions. One is she is telling people in the community that he's a pedophile. And the other one is setting her family up to understand where it came from. It was something he did wrong. And in the novel, he then gets, quote, outed with this false narrative in front of a large gathering of people at a barbecue where he's accused of liking his nephew in the same way that he should like a woman. And people start calling him a pedophile. And he is so caught off guard by that he becomes obsessive on figuring out what happened, how did this happen, and goes on to show how that obsession just blows up on the family, but has this not always likely outcome of the family starting to talk to each other and comparing notes and comparing stories about the sister and actually banding together. And when their realities are validated, it undoes the gaslighting.
So in a lot of ways, this is what's happening in politics.
Gaslighting. Yes, gaslighting. For me, as a counselor and as a therapist, many years ago, I used to have to refer my clients to watching the actual movie Gaslight. And even then, remarkably, they would watch it and they would still doubt that they were hearing and watching this movie of something that they related to, but doubted, they didn't understand why they related to it. And so it takes a lot of debriefing and walking them through it, yes, because it creates a very crazy making environment that people just start doubting themselves. And for people who haven't been through it, it's hard to wrap your head around it. It's hard to really understand it.
Have you found that recent years that you're coming across more gaslighting in families in your counseling practice, or is that something that is changing from earlier years?
I would say it's not changing from earlier years. I will say that gaslighting was never talked about in my training as a therapist.
Oh,
It
interesting.
is, people didn't even know what it was. I mean, in the alcoholic field, it was called denial, so you could validate at least that way. But it's much more pervasive. And typically, gaslighting comes from somebody who's disordered. They have a need to control, and they use gaslighting to control somebody's reality to achieve some end of their own. It is entirely possible also to accidentally gaslight. And by that, I mean secondary gaslighters, where, for in the example of the good sister and her flying monkeys, many of the flying monkeys were just passing on gossip. They had no idea it wasn't true, but it was altering people's perception of the target, which was the brother named Thomas. So then they would all react differently around him. He could feel like something was off, and then this thing explodes on him, and his whole reality is distorted. So in the sense of gossip and people repeating things that are untrue, we've always had that. In the sense of people planting false narratives, actually, we've always had that. Right. But what you don't always see as a counselor, but what I started to see many years ago, was that somebody would begin to doubt themselves that I was working with in such a pervasive way that it puzzled me. And so I would pay attention to it and explore it a little bit. And probably the biggest instance I remember, that was a woman who had a husband who was molesting her daughter. And the daughter had grown up and had begun to talk about it. But he used to gaslight her all the time. If she walked in and there were 5 trash cans outside, he'd say, no, there are only 2. And she could look at them and see 5, and he'd say 2. And when she said that to me, I realized, oh my goodness, this woman has been gaslighted, because she described once going by a liquor store. This was the big red flag for me. And thinking that it was being robbed, she saw 2 kids go in with a gun. But she doubted herself. She wasn't sure, so she just went home. And the next day she heard it had been robbed. Now that is a huge example of self-doubt that had generalized to the rest of her life.
Wow.
And so,
wow, that's huge though.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. It just almost knocked me out of my chair. It was so big, because he had used it to have her question her reality all the time. And of course, then if he was taking advantage of a child in the house, she would think it was going on, but not be sure it was going on. So very, very insidious.
So in a sense, in a case like that, you doubt what you sense and perceive.
Absolutely.
In other words, you doubt what you see.
That's right. That's right. And then other people, then it can become cult-like, where other people you become suggestible, and they can, when you trust them, they begin to define your reality in ways that don't exist.
Wow, that's huge.
It's huge.
Well,
go ahead.
Okay, so one attribute of gaslighters is a need to control. Is that it? To manipulate and control the...
Yes, for the intentional gaslighter who just wants to gaslight and control somebody, yes. People like having an affair that are lying about it, that has a gaslighting impact. That doesn't mean the person is out to make the other person feel crazy. They're lying, and they're lying to cover up something they don't want to be exposed about. But true gaslighting, as it goes back to the movie, yes, somebody's trying to control someone, control their actions, control their behaviors to their own ends.
Wow. So do you think that most gaslighters are natural liars?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They're very comfortable lying, and often they're very confident, way too confident, way more confident than most people in their lies.
Well, do you ever get somebody as a client who's dating, say a woman who's dating a guy, and he lies about everything? So is that guy a gaslighter or just a liar?
Well, he he could be a player who's just going to lie. But typically the story would begin with her talking about, I'm just going to use her, but it could be a woman too,
Yeah.
and a man, a woman doing it to a man. But it starts out with her talking about how amazing the relationship was in the beginning. He was such a good listener. He was so attentive. He just paid attention to everything. He could just almost intuit what she liked, showered her with gifts. It was an amazing relationship. And it's only till later that things start not making sense and little lies come up and she wonders about them and dots don't connect. It's what we call cognitive dissonance, where we've got different dots that we're trying to connect and they just don't connect. And the human mind wants to connect. We want to make sense of our world. So the more it doesn't make sense, and it's very subtle, the more it doesn't make sense, the more we think and think and think and begin to obsess and even dream about what's going on.
Huh. So, well, okay, well, when you hear this kind of thing, well, how do you advise people?
Well,
Don't listen, don't look. I mean,
okay, well, first of all, it takes time to debrief them and get them to see that, well, yes, the dots don't connect. And yes, that is what's happening here. So validating their reality and that they're not crazy is the first step because they're so confused. Then we begin to look at, okay, so how is this happening in current time if they're still involved with the person? Sometimes I'm dealing with someone after they're not involved anymore. While they're still involved with the person, well, when it's a love interest, we have to look at the trust. How do you trust somebody where they're not giving you truthful information? And I explain trust is the cornerstone of a relationship. Without that, you're in quicksand. And of course, they feel like they're in quicksand. However, they have this love connection with if it's a romantic interest, love connection of that just sense of being one with them where they just were so attentive. And it's like an addiction because literally when we fall in love, it changes our brain chemistry and it releases more dopamine, which is our feel good neurotransmitter. Sorry. Let's see what
Mari,
sorry, turn that down. Sorry. That was an echo. So it's a feel-good neurotransmitter, which is, it's the same neurotransmitters that cocaine works on. So there's kind of this addictive quality. And with a gaslighter, they will gaslight, the person will get very stressed out, and then suddenly there'll be a little honeymoon period. And everything's just all like it was in the beginning. And then it changes back to the gaslighting and the abuse and the craziness. So what that does is gives the person just enough breadcrumbs to keep coming back for more. And it's very difficult to break that pattern. And so literally we have to talk about taking a time out, going no contact. Typically I'll say, let's just take a 30-day break here. There's something magical about 30 days where if there's absolutely no contact at all, the person starts to regain a sense of themselves. And often that's enough for them to start noticing more and more what's going on. Now in a romantic interest, it's just not going to end well. There's nothing you can do. If you have children, you're bound to that person, and that's a different story. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into here, where it's just someone you're dating versus somebody you married versus a family member. What would be
just
most?
Give us all your knowledge.
Yeah.
All of it, okay, I'll be glad. So if it's someone they're just dating and they don't have children, ultimately they want to look at going no contact with them and breaking the relationship off. And in order to do that, they first have to start breaking that addiction, that brain addiction. So I educate them about that. And we talk about self-care. And anybody in a situation like this has to exercise good self-care. You have to break the isolation, because when you're in this kind of situation, you become very isolated and this person has more and more control over your reality. So no matter what you don't feel like doing, you have to do it. You have to go out with friends. You have to socialize with other people. You have to journal write, because that helps get it out of your head onto paper so you're not just exhausted from your mind ruminating. You have to just do nice things for yourself and break that isolation. That's one of the biggest things. And as you do that, then you can begin to see more and more what's going on, because some of this is the person's reality getting validated. As the gaslighter continues what they do, the person now begins to see it. And the gaslighter also learns how to push your buttons. Know that expression. They know something you're vulnerable about, and they'll push your button, making you feel emotionally reactive, especially if they've been gaslighting you. They'll call you crazy. Oh, you're just too crazy. You're too sensitive. Here you go again. Or I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about.
Right.
And that's somebody's buttons that causes them to emotionally react. And then it's a gotcha. See, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And of course, that chips away at somebody's self-esteem. So
Uh-huh.
in taking that 30 days away from them and doing lots of self-care, they begin to see it while it's happening. And that's in a interesting way that validates their reality. But that doesn't mean just because they know it in their head that emotionally they can get out of the
Right.
relationship. That's what makes it so difficult. So getting out of the relationship is very educational, having them take breaks. And when they see that they do need to get away from the person, if it's not a coworker and it's not somebody you have children with, there's no reason to maintain contact with them. So those are the cleanest ones. You go no contact, you block them on social media, you block them on your phone, you take no calls, because the minute you
Right.
have contact with them, you're going to get sucked back in. Your brain's going to respond. It's like cigarette smoking. You know, you'll want that cigarette, you'll want that fix. And there is a chemical addiction component to it.
Alexa,
Now, what about if they're, oh, go ahead, Rob. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
Alexa, what is the connection with social media and gaslighting?
Oh my goodness. Well, social media.
That's a whole other
So-
show.
Yes. So I'll just say it briefly. Well, first of all, you want to have no contact. So you don't want them making comments on there, even nice ones, because that'll suck you back in. But oh my goodness, somebody can go on social media and they can post all kinds of fake things about you. They can talk about how you're having emotional meltdowns, you're paranoid, you think you see everything that isn't there. And then the person who's being gaslighted, even though they now know what this person's up to, all the other people on their social media do not. So now they have all these flying monkeys with their fake stories around them. And then they have to sort through, are they able to straighten this out with these friends or acquaintances? And if those people are just really locked into the false narrative, unfortunately, they really have to go no contact with them also, because it's just crazy making. But there will be people in their circle who get what's going on and they'll remain friends. But the social media is a just incredible, insidious way to spread a false narrative about somebody and surround them with flying monkeys, which that comes from the Wizard of Oz, you know, with the
Right.
flying
Right.
monkeys and having people
Yeah.
pick you up.
And it's not only people, but ideas as well that can be spread that in the same way.
Absolutely. Yes. Ideas about
Conspiracy
people
theory.
or ideas, facts you want them to believe.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Or say, you know, two people experience the same event, but the gaslighter would say, no, that didn't happen that way. Would that be an example of gaslighting?
Well, it can, at its worst, it's a lie. Once people begin believing it, the next step is for people to be confused about it. Once it moves into confusion, then now the gaslighter has control. And so now the gaslighter offers a solution to clarify the confusion. It's like, oh, it's relief from that cognitive dissonance of trying to figure it out. So now we have that. Well, of course, we're going to cling to that belief of that fact now, because we don't want to go back to, well, wait a minute, we got this dot and this dot and they don't connect. Oh, here's why they don't connect. Can you think of anything recently you might have seen with that? Anything?
Rob?
What's that?
You want to give your example?
Yeah, right. So I have a case of gaslighting that's happened to me recently. It deals with a person.
I didn't do it.
It deals with a person that I was working on his novel as a ghostwriter, and he started acting very odd, and I belatedly realized he's probably a mentally unstable person, because he wanted the novel to be exactly the way he was thinking about it, but he couldn't write it himself, but he wanted me to write it exactly. And as things just went off the rails, it got worse and worse, where he's accusing me of changing things against his will. and then it actually turned around. So he's like gaslighting me about the story, and it's like, listen, this is just a first draft. I could rewrite. And he says, no, you're going way too fast, way too fast. You can't do this like this. And so he's gaslighting me. And then what he does is projects it to me. So he's telling the company that's the intermediary that I'm gaslighting him. And it just
Oh my
got to be
goodness.
yeah. So it's not only that he's gaslighting me, but then supposedly I'm gaslighting him and telling a third party who's comes in the middle to solve the situation. So it's a crazy situation. So I just basically had to stop saying anything. That was the only way I could respond. And he went on and on, but
Yes.
I refused to respond.
Yes, so you went no contact with him.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So may I respond to that story a bit?
Sure.
Do we have time?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So Rob, if you were someone that came into my office and because you're really distressed, this is a professional gaslighting going on, in your profession, and you're disturbed by it, you can't just write the person off because he's spreading these stories. Okay. The first thing that came to mind for me as I listened to you was, and it's a good example, is that I would suspect, I would hypothesize. In my work, I hypothesize, then we look to see what supports the hypothesis. Not just some know-it-all that knows everything. So I would hypothesize that it sounds more like there's a high probability that this person who retains your services and the victim and target of gaslighting. And I'll tell you why. First, they know the term. Second of all, you said must have some kind of mental instability. Yeah. The person has this incredible story in their head that they can't get out of their head, but they can't get it on paper themselves to write it, and they can't communicate it to you well, and they're frustrated with you. This is somebody who has been gaslighted to such a degree that they're desperate to be heard about something, and they can't communicate it well because they're so confused. And they really need help. They really probably need to work with a therapist that understands gaslighting and debrief through it. And then they'd be able to put their story together. They probably have just read about gaslighting and said, oh, this is what happened to me. But they're not in recovery, not at all. And it's really sad. And on top of that, you can see somebody who has been gaslighted will cause others they try to communicate with to feel like they're losing it, going crazy. And this is just too much and being gaslighted. So it gets passed on to them. Right. Now, Rob knew enough to just go, okay, this is a gaslighting kind of situation. It's crazy making. It's not making any sense. The person doesn't sound devious and malignant to me. They sound like, I would explore the possibility that maybe they're the target and unrecovered of gaslighting.
That's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, that would probably fit, Rob.
Maybe, yeah. I've always felt that he was like some mid-level manager who had people working under him who don't like him, and that has to come into play too. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that's how I've always felt about him, because he wants to control everything and people around him, and that he took his own professional life, whatever it might be, and just a position
projected it
into the ghostwriting story and the way he dealt with me.
Oh, very possibly. And if he was a mid-level manager, now one possibility also, and again, I'm just using working hypothesis. I don't know this man. I'm not saying I know anything about him, but based on my anecdotal experience, I would look at that, and what first thing I wonder about, and I'm wondering, not saying it's true, but I would start with, well, he could well have been gaslighted by somebody that worked for him. If everybody dislikes him, of course, the first thing we're going to assume is what you did, Rob. But remember, I've been working with these situations for a long time. So one of the things might be that somebody under him started stories about him. And played different co-workers against each other.
Mhm.
And so now none of them like him, but he doesn't understand what's happened. And the more we lose that sense of understanding and making sense of our reality, the more we cling on and try to control everything. And
Yeah.
then see that person, oh, that person's just crazy. Oh, they're this, they're that. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but somewhere in that guy's background, something's happened. And the fact that he thinks you're gaslighting him, such the story sounded like that before you even got to that part to me. That would be something I would explore.
Yeah.
Not much you can do.
Yeah, right. There wasn't anything I could do except just cut it off and
Yes.
end it. Have you ever, by the way, worked with companies that have problems like this, or just families?
Companies or people who work for companies that gaslight employees?
Yeah, well, I think
Yeah, that would be.
I think there are people who go into companies and try to, talk to the different levels of employees and work with them over what their problems are. And I don't know. I was just wondering if you had ever been involved in anything like that.
Not as a consultant, but I had a client once who had a pretty high up position, was a director of a big department and had multiple sites
Mhm.
that happened to be a woman she had to oversee. And they brought a consultant in actually at her request to help with one area of the department. And this consultant started gaslighting, but my client didn't understand what was happening. So started gaslighting my client. And so being able to debrief her pretty quickly and coach her on how to handle this with the understanding that this consultant was going to hang herself at some point. It was a female consultant,
Mhm.
right? So she was building herself up at the cost of gaslighting my client and by getting my client's staff to see her differently by reframing and actually creating a false narrative. That was very, very
Wow.
tricky. But the consultant ended up hanging herself and they
Literally?
yeah, and
Did she
things
literally
surrounding.
hang?
Oh, I'm
Did she
sorry.
literally hang herself?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking
Oh,
of,
okay.
give her enough rope and she'll hang herself.
Yeah,
Is what
right.
she did.
Okay.
Manipulation. I'm glad you clarified that. Yes. Oh my goodness. So
Although,
yes.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I could imagine somebody committing suicide over being gaslighted to the point where you don't know who you are, what your reality is. I mean, where you feel nuts.
Yeah, absolutely. That is I haven't had a client have that happen, but that does happen. And you can see that sometimes, and I'm currently researching cases like this. It's an area I'm interested in. But when you have a big corporation and you have a whistleblower, it turns out that corporations will have a whistleblower policy, which encourages people to come forward. It looks good to the IRS when they ask you if you have that, but they actually have a shadow whistleblower policy. That's what I'm learning, which is they deal with
Interesting.
it by gaslighting. So they
Wow.
encourage people to come forward and then they build a narrative to make them sound like they're paranoid or suspicious or accusing everybody of corruption or angry or bitter. We hear it in the news all the time. I was just a disgruntled employee. But
Right.
you can see with some people, we see it on the national scene right now, where that attack on them goes from disgruntled to, they're bitter, they're angry, they've got a hidden agenda, they attack. And it's brutal in a corporate situation because how do you go no contact with that? You have to leave the job.
Yeah.
But you become emotionally unstable as you're betrayed. We call it betrayal trauma over and over again by supervisors and people above them who you've known for a long time, who you trusted. And they flip everything around on you and make you look like you're unstable, which causes them to try harder to communicate. Can't you see what's going on? And the more, all they have to do is gaslight by saying, I don't quite understand. I don't quite understand. Or no, that didn't happen. And when it's your job and your livelihood, and I mean, it's just terrible. Yes, people have committed suicide over those situations.
And it could have been something that was put forth just because they wanted to get rid of that person, so that somebody made up the story in the first place that
that would be so. Keep going.
Yeah, So, if somebody would like to get rid of this boss, they make up a story, spread it around, and then the person has to defend himself, herself, and then the people above that person hear the story and start to wonder, well, maybe this person is not the right person for this job if
Mhm.
there's so much trouble the other people are having who are working for him.
Well, and beyond that, Rob, think of the story you just showed with me about the guy who
Mhm.
wanted you to write the book.
Right.
Imagine for a moment that someone under him started a rumor about him. And so all of a sudden he's feeling gaslighted. So he's becoming obsessive and controlling. Then they're complaining to the bosses upstairs about how obsessive and controlling he is. Do you see
Mhm.
how he's been
Right.
provoked to act that way? And
Yeah.
then the
Hmm.
bosses, oh my gosh, this guy has bad management skills. He's out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this behavior doesn't start much earlier, like maybe in middle school, where especially with girls, I remember when our daughter was in middle school, it seemed like there was a lot of gaslighting going on
Yeah.
with those kids, and it seemed to be really cutthroat. And have you ever had an experience with children with
Oh,
gaslighting? Gaslighting.
I've heard experiences of adults who went through that as children.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you are spot on. I mean, we call them mean girls, right? And
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
talk
Yeah,
about middle school,
exactly.
you know, it really starts in fifth grade. That fifth, sixth grade is such a brutal time, you know, because the girls are changing, they're getting into, you know, pre-adolescent, adolescence, and they just, you know, they get into cliques and they have the popular girls. And yes, they can absolutely start rumors, and that goes on all through high school.
Hmm.
Yes, and you can even have kids, well, you see it now on the news, sadly, where kids are bullied online by just that
Right.
kind of experience who commit suicide. It's horrible, and it gaslights them, it isolates them. And, you know, it's a very important time to be with your friends. So we have all these different names, you know, we have mean girls and we have denial and we have gaslighting. But I think if we took gaslighting and looked at what it is and didn't just say it was intentional to drive somebody crazy,
Hmm.
but it was going to be used to manipulate them in a way that they were pushed out of something or bullied or pushed into something they didn't want to do. We would understand, we need to understand more about gaslighting, specifically about its impact on the target,
Hmm.
because it's a
Hmm.
question of could they commit suicide? Yes, and they have. And you see that with children. And I've worked with adults who were, quote, bullied or gossiped about when they were
Mhm.
kids. You know, competent adults, you know, they doctors or nurses work in an emergency room, but they still remember that and they've compartmentalized it, but they suffer from a lot of anxiety.
Huh.
And
Hmm.
that anxiety goes back to those days of, I'll just say it simply, they were experiencing gaslighting when they were in middle school or high school. So, Rob, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And your
Right.
daughter, I would love to talk to the three of you sometime about her experiences if she
Yeah.
wanted to.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm wondering if being gaslighted in middle school for her has led to being attracted to men who are basically liars.
Well, I'll tell you why that could be true, because we gravitate to one, what's familiar to us. So if liars and being lied about is something that is familiar to us, and you know, middle
Uh-huh.
school, we're starting to separate from our families. That's the developmental task.
Right.
So
Right.
we separate from families and we have to hang out with our peers. They become our new family. Well, if our peers are liars and manipulators, that becomes our new norm. And you know, to fit
Mm.
in, sometimes you even see the girls start acting like the other girls. So you have one probably budding narcissist in the group, and the other
Right.
ones the behavior and start doing the same thing because it's peer pressure. So it's
Mm.
very, very insidious. And what makes it so horrible is that during middle school, during early adolescence, that's the time when our psyche is so fragile and vulnerable. It's a time of starting separation from family, taking new things, learning new things about our peers. You know, our frontal lobes aren't developed yet,
Right.
and so it can really it can leave a mark and an impact on
Yeah.
us. And just shortly, I'll say very quickly, it can be like a deep gouge in your arm. And for some people, that's never healed. The gentleman you talked about, Rob, that's probably, if we're correct, the hypothesis we're correct, a deep wound with anything you're doing without realizing it, pouring salt in it. Now, what does that feel like? You go bananas, right?
Right.
Then, for some people, that wound is healed to a scab. So they're very protective of it, but they get through life and do pretty well until something comes around and bumps it, or God forbid, rips the scab off. Now, out of nowhere, they've suddenly gone berserk. So what we want through counseling and therapy is to heal that wound to a scab, to a white scar, where you see it, you remember it, doesn't hurt anymore.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
sorry, and I'm sorry, disembodied voice, John. Here. But with everything you guys have talked about, how do you tell the difference between gaslighting and good faith difference of opinion? And let's add an extra degree of difficulty, online.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a checklist? How do you tell if somebody's gaslighting versus just a good faith difference in opinion?
Yes, that's an excellent question, because everybody today can say, "Oh my gosh, I'm being gaslighted," and that can mean they're having a gaslighting experience where they're starting to doubt themselves. So we won't diminish that, but in a case, let's start with just a very heated debate. You both feel passionately about facts, but you feel passionately about what they mean, and it's different. Well, if you're talking over each other and disagreeing, you're just talking over each other and you're disagreeing, right? John, you know that that's going on, right?
I agree. Yep.
Okay.
I can recognize that. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, after a while, I had the experience with someone who was in the opposite end of the political spectrum than I was. But, she had a lot of attributes I really liked about her. And so I said, it's better if we just don't talk about this stuff. And oh my gosh, everything that came on her favorite news channel, she'd be racing over calling me about, as if somehow we were like-minded kindred spirits. And, so finally I just cut contact with her. Now, she wasn't gaslighting me, but she wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop the discussion. So in that kind of situation, it's not gaslighting. When you see it, you stop it. And I pretty much went no contact with her because she was obsessed with the stuff, had her own stuff going on. Now, in another situation, it's less likely, John, that it's going to be any kind of heated discussion that's gaslighting, because gaslighting, by definition, is very subtle. So if you give me an example of a discussion, well, let me say this. Let's say you and the person are having a heated discussion, and you go away and you research something, and you come back and you say, look, I researched this, and what you were saying isn't accurate. Look at this. Now, at that moment, that person could say, well, I never said that. Well, whether it's intentional or not, that's gaslighting. Yeah. Or the person might say, your facts are wrong. Okay, well, let's go look at your facts. And then they start spinning all these stories because there are no facts to support them, right? Well, then that becomes a gaslighting experience.
Sure,
and
sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, I think that is a problem, especially online these days. Is just I think, and you'd said earlier that the term gaslighting just really came in vogue, within the last few years, and I think it gets overused when it's just, in a lot of cases, it's just a difference of opinion. But if you can't agree to disagree with the person, then it's really the same result. You just have to cut them off. So, yeah.
And if you can't agree if you can't agree what the facts are too, the difference between facts and opinions. That's
but I mean, that doesn't mean one party or the other is right or wrong. I mean, just because you're cutting them off doesn't mean you're correct. It just means you don't have the patience to have the discussion, but I mean, because that could come from either side.
I mean, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of flat earthers that really are really pretty adamant that they know that that's true.
Right.
And I'm sure they cut a lot of people off because their facts don't align with somebody else's. But but that's what concerns me, is just that there is some gray area there between just general good faith debate versus getting gaslighted. So
Well, yeah, in a sense, you're talking about we're kind of leading into, okay, are conspiracy theories a form of gaslighting?
They could be experienced as that. And you notice I say the
Uh-huh.
word experience because
Right.
somebody with any theory, conspiracy is a judgment we put on it. So let's take that out of it for a minute, okay?
Uh-huh.
Somebody with two, and it kind of goes towards what John's talking about, two different theories of something can disagree on it. We can agree to disagree, okay? One of us can have so many facts that dispute it. It's like, it's unbelievable. And the other person has no facts, but they have a lot of circumstantial evidence to support it. And they really believe it. And we can go
Rob,
into
this is like that podcast. Rob,
What
that's like
podcast?
what she's talking about now is like that podcast that
yeah.
we didn't put up.
Oh, right.
Well, and that's really
Yeah.
what brought up the question, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, somebody can
Sorry,
really,
Mary.
really believe it. That's okay. That's okay. I mean, this is so interesting to me also. Somebody can really, really believe it. Now, is it a delusion or is it just alternate facts that somebody believes? And we know that people can be very psychologically vulnerable. And so people who are masters at gaslighters can plant, conspiracy theories to where they believe them, and they believe them with their whole being. So you can't change anything. Is that gaslighting? I would say that's secondary gaslighting. So you've got somebody up here who knows something's a lie, but they feed it to people. They're flying monkeys as if it's true. And usually those flying monkeys have a certain vulnerability about them. Either they really trust this person. We're vulnerable when we trust. They trust this person who really is not trustworthy. They're a malignant narcissist, for example. Well, now these people become the flying monkeys who just believe this with every bone in their body. And then they go on and they spread it. And then they run into somebody who counters that and says, no. You created a conspiracy. This doesn't work. Well, it's become cult-like, but and so then the other person will actually experience you as the gaslighter of them.
Well, but you said something there that I think is interesting. So is it so for it to be gaslighting, does the person doing the gaslighting have to know that it's not true?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I gave an example of where the original source of the lie comes from someone that's gaslighting. But if the person right here really believes it, so they're the original person, there's a delusion.
Well, let me give you an example real quick that I've used in the past in similar conversations, not this exact conversation, but Galileo was imprisoned because he brought the bad news that the Earth's not the center of the solar system, that the Earth actually revolves around the sun. The facts at the time were that the Earth was the center of the solar system, that the sun revolved around the Earth. As it turns out, bad fact, wasn't true, So I mean, that's where it gets complicated when we start talking about facts, because facts get updated,
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yeah. So we go on what the best way. I mean, at some level, we could all be gaslighting each other, you're saying.
Yeah.
In reality, most people will make a concerted effort to research facts from reputable sources. We can only do the best we can do. If we have somebody on a podcast who spews all these facts, but there's nothing to back them up, that's very different than somebody who's on a podcast and has a lot of factual information to come up. And we, as human beings, are not perfect, but we can only do the best we can do. So I'm not sure if that's really answering your question, John, because I'm concerned also that somebody might have researched bogus sites and truly believe that the Earth is still flat, or the Earth is the center of the universe.
Well, the flat earther thing was just a throwaway, but my bigger concern is just would be more in the case of Galileo, where guess what, the what is considered
the mainstream belief at the
time,
which was religion.
It
was the religious zealots who put him in prison.
But I don't, that to me, that doesn't matter. It's just that I'm more concerned that this was the widely held belief that this was a fact. Somebody disputed that fact, and guess what? They turned out to be correct, but suffered, to some extent for bringing that to the table. I'm concerned we have to be careful that we can't have debates without it turning into being called out as gaslighting. Anyways, that's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've got a good example of that of the government gaslighting us over decades, and I think it's related to UFOs. That basically we've been told since maybe the mid to late 40s that you're a little wacko if you believe in those things flying in the sky. If you didn't really see that, or if you did see that, it's not really what you think it is.
It's a balloon,
swamp gas, or whatever. And so, but yet, I think there's evidence that in the government that there are elements of people who actually are researching it and do believe it themselves, and this has been going on for decades too, but maybe at the same time promoting this basically gaslighting, this false narrative, and that projects onto people who are curious about the subject. And so it was a way of keeping them silent because of whatever it might be, that I guess it was the idea that people couldn't handle it if the government would come out and say that we are not the only intelligent beings in the universe. So,
well, basically the Pentagon is saying that now by their investigation into UFOs.
Well, I think it's opening up more. I think there's more interest in it. I mean, you have there was a 1 hour investigation in Congress that it was very basic, but it just showed that it's a response, because when things open up, so like when Obama was president, there was a line you could call in and ask questions about, and it was like 60% of the questions were about UFOs, and so it was, they would say, well, if we move beyond the UFO question, then these are some of the other concerns. That I'm not saying that Obama was taking any position one way or the other, but it's just that it just showed that there is a widespread interest in that subject, and yet it's still in the mainstream remains taboo.
Okay, and you're also pointing out that the purpose of the response by the government is to control the narrative.
Right.
Yes.
Right? And usually that comes from a place of fear for most people. Yeah. Most people don't control for the sake of control. Some people do. But remember, gaslighting is a process. If I'm dismissive, we're all dismissive sometimes. We all have a conversation where we go, oh, no, I didn't say that. You misunderstood. Or I might say, you misunderstood and maybe you did. And I think that's John's point, is that we can you guys still hear me?
Yeah. Yep, we're good.
Yeah, okay. So I think that's more to John's point of, when is it just something we do in everyday life, have a disagreement or dismiss something or whatever, versus process, a chronic gaslighting process that goes on with the intent to control somebody's perception of reality. And also not just the intent being there, because sometimes people are part of a flying monkey gossip thing where they have no idea what they're doing. They think they're doing the right thing. It really causes somebody to doubt their reality. If we, like in the example I gave, where I finally with this person had to say, you know, just no contact anymore because I asked you not to talk about this stuff and you won't stop. That's not gaslighting either one of us. That's just saying we set a boundary and they didn't stop, right? Or we can agree to disagree, as John said. But I don't leave doubting myself. If somebody lays out excellent facts, well, I might doubt myself in a healthy way and say, oh, I need to go check these. In fact, this person said something to me about the name of the talking head who made this comment, and she was all excited about it, and it was no way statistically it could be correct. But I thought, okay, I'm not going to say anything yet. I'm going to go research. Maybe this person doesn't have a post-secondary education, this talking head. But she got a darn law degree. It's like, oh God. You know, so there's healthy doubt when you go and recheck your facts. That's part of what we do in discussion, discourse.
And I think that's the Galileo example where this guy came with science. I mean, science that he had performed, but it was pushing against the general consensus at the time. And I think anyways, I'm just.
So he spent most of his life in prison for it.
I'm going to repeat myself. I'm just repeating myself now. But that's what worries me, especially online, especially with the online experience these days, is that what you've got to be. I'm not going to put it that way. Galileo. Where are the Galileos today, and would they even present their science to the, you know, and certainly some of this happens behind the scenes in academia and through paper, you know, through research organizations and stuff, but anyways, but yeah, it's just that if the entire world believes that the sun revolves around the earth, you're going to be the one that comes and tells them, nope.
Yeah.
No, the earth revolves around the sun. Sorry, we're not the center of the solar system.
Well, what about this guy at Google? I'm sorry, who said he's got this AI, that the AI is cognitive or something?
Yeah, no, we talked about that on the unreleased podcast.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, AI is a term that gets way overused. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alexa.
Oh, I was going to comment, John. I think the Galileo example is really good, especially when you put it into the question context of happened so many years ago versus if it was happening now, would he have come forward? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to paraphrase what you were saying. Well, back in the day of Galileo, when people are afraid of something, they throw you in prison, they shut you up, right? You disappear. Right. That still goes on with some dictatorships today, people disappearing. But in a, quote, civilized society where we have free speech, you can't throw people in prison for something like that.
But you can't. Yeah, go ahead. You're probably about to say what I was going to say, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. But you can deplatform them and cancel them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, you can gaslight them and make them sound like they're crazy. Yes, and so they no longer have any credibility. So they're in a different kind of prison, and that's a good example.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, that's what's what
that's scary.
It worries me. Yeah, but
yeah.
Sorry.
And something related to this in politics is a phrase that came up in the last several years is alternative facts, as if those are just as good as the regular facts. So that really messes things up when you have
it does.
Millions of people believing what is, would be alternative facts versus facts. So and probably saying that, well, our facts are the facts, you have the alternative facts, and really messing things up.
I would so love to know where she came up with that.
Yeah.
That alternative facts, right?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I wish I knew, because it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is.
Alexa, suppose you're involved, you're married to a gaslighter, and you've got kids, like this story I had mentioned to you. What do you do?
Well, I think it's not a healthy situation for anyone in the family. So most likely you either go crazy and your kids grow up in a crazy environment, or you divorce the person and then you got to work through the co-parenting and custody arrangements. So you keep it very straight and on track. You don't get involved in any other communication over your kids. Your kids come home and say, Mommy or Daddy said this about you, and you don't engage with that. You just validate the kids' reality and teach them that critical thinking skill. Now,
but suppose abuse is involved.
Emotional abuse?
No, or physical abuse.
Then you call in whatever your local child protective services is. Yes, and unfortunately, I think maybe either you're going here at something I see a lot and the courts do, is that allegations of abuse are a way that they believe some people, and some people probably have, used it as a way to manipulate the courts and manipulate custody arrangements. And unfortunately, because some people have done that, the judges look at that as, oh, it's just a custody case, or protective services, oh, it's just a custody case, which is gaslighting all by itself, because it's totally dismissing a reality, because people aren't investigating it well to find out if it's accurate. And nowadays in divorces, they have forensic psychologists that they interview the kids, they interview the parents, they have an MMPI, they get a, it's just, it's a huge industry, and that's what goes on. They even have in divorces a special communication system that cannot be tampered with. And sometimes the parents just communicate over that, where it's all in writing and there's a log of everything discussed. So they can't later on say, well, no, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that. No, I said this. It's all in writing. It's pretty extreme in family law.
Interesting. Wow. I'd love to take a class from you. You ought to teach what you know.
Well, maybe someday, not too far future, I'll have a blog on it. That's probably
okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Well, this has been fantastic. And you can, Alexis, tell us where people can find your book, The Good Sister and Her Flying Monkeys.
Oh, okay. The book is on Amazon, and it's for Kindle. It's also paperback, and it's also audio, and it's on Barnes and Noble. I think if you just Googled it, if you wanted to, in Google The Good Sister and Her Flying Monkeys by Alexa Blye. That's Blye. If you have your favorite place that you buy books from, it'll come up on that. But I'm an Amazon girl, so I go to Amazon.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been fantastic. So interesting. I have more questions for you, but I'll save them for another time.
It brings up a whole lot of issues.
It sure does.
Yeah.
It does. And thank you for having me, because I learned some things talking from the three of you also.
Great.
This is more of what we need to do, is talk to each other.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay.
And I'll send you the link when is it coming out tonight, John?
Yes, it will be. We'll post this today. Yep.
Okay, and I'll send you the link.
Okay.
And you put it on your blog.
Thank you.
Put it on your blog.
You're right. Yes, and thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Thank you.